Good afternoon, everybody, and thanks so much for joining us. My name is Jennifer Schechter, and I'm the Senior Director for Content Impact and Outreach at Consumer Reports. I've spoken to many of you through the years, and again, we're really happy that you've joined us. Many of you were on our webinar last year at around this time when we talked about our ADAS report and what we'd like to see in automated systems, and we're delighted to see you this year. And we've seen a lot of progress all around in this work. Today on this webinar, featuring our Director of Automotive Testing, Jake Fisher, we're going to talk about some of the progress we've made in terms of ranking automated systems, our overall score, and what's going on with ADAS and naming. You will notice there's a Q&A pod, and feel free to type in questions as the presentation's going on. And after Jake's presentation, which is going to last roughly 20 or so minutes, we're happy to take questions. Just a note that we will be making a recording of this webinar, so for your colleagues who missed it today but want to see the content, we'll be emailing that out along with a PDF of the presentation. So with that, it's my pleasure to turn it over to Jake.
Hello, everyone. This is Jake Fisher. I'm very happy all of you kind of tuned in for this. This gives us a great opportunity to update on many things that are going on. So our agenda today, first I'll be talking about our vehicle overall score and some updates we're making in terms of the calculations and what goes into that. Also, some more detail of the partial automation systems ratings that we launched just recently. Updates on our ADAS nomenclature working group and what progress we've made there. And for kind of the first time, we're going to give you a little bit of a heads up of kind of where we're going and potentially of some of the changes in terms of scoring that we may be looking at in the future. And of course, Q&A. So first, just kind of a recap of what goes into the overall score, and I'm sure many of you are familiar with this. When we rank the vehicles and we rate the vehicles, we're really talking about overall score, which encompasses many different aspects. This is something we just launched a few years ago, and it's really helped in terms of clarity. And of course, the cars with the higher overall score wind up as the recommended vehicles. So in that, of course, is road test performance, reliability, owner satisfaction, and crash protection and avoidance, and some other features in there in terms of rollaway prevention, as well as obviously standard forward collision warning and automatic emergency braking. But really what here we're talking about is what are the changes, what have changed, what's really changed right now. And later this month, we will be updating the reliability and owner satisfaction ratings, which obviously will make a large difference in the overall score. Reliability is a very large portion of that overall score, and you'll definitely see a big change in terms of our ratings. Some of the other changes we're going to see, though, is in terms of this other area, the crash protection and avoidance area. So as we've done before, we're still looking at standard forward collision warning, standard automatic emergency braking, both city speed and at higher speeds, rollaway prevention. But some of the changes we're making is in terms of crash tests. So what we've done is we're weighting these slightly different depending on which crash test it is. So in the past, if you were playing the home game, trying to calculate these scores, we basically looked at all of, for instance, the poor ratings the same or marginal rating the same. Now we're really looking at the how much that really does indicate risk in terms of crash. So how often is a person in that seat? How often does that type of crash happen? How big of an impact that is? So for instance, the small offset passenger is incorporated into the scores, but not as serious as one of the other crash tests. The other change that we will be doing. And to be very clear, this will all be implemented next week, is the blind spot warning. We are going to be giving points for vehicles that provide blind spot warning as standard equipment across the model. And you might be asking, why now? Why blind spot now? And what we're looking at is we're looking at a recent survey that we performed. We have done ADAS surveys in the past, but when we ask people about how satisfied they are with some of this equipment, we ask them, did it in fact help you avoid a crash? We see blind spot warning as right at the top of those ratings. People absolutely love it, and they do perceive that it actually helps them avoid crashes. When we look at the availability, we see a different story. So while 85% of models, and this is our own data that we've collected, while they offer it, we're seeing it only standard equipment is 15%. So there's this technology is right. This technology is developed. This technology is, people see this as very useful, but we would really like to see it implemented across the industry much more, and that's why we're making this change. Moving on, partial automation systems ratings. So probably many of you are familiar with what we launched and what those ratings are. I just want to use this moment to kind of explain a little bit of why we did this, a little bit of kind of our thought process, and really what we're trying to do here. And to be kind of clear, I mean, this is not about, I want to buy a partial automation system, which is that's one for me to buy. But there's a lot that we were able to kind of glean and take away by looking at the systems as a whole and compare them. So first of all, the different OEMs are implementing this technology very, very differently. You know, I've said before, it's a little bit of the Wild West, but there's just a huge variation, and we want to really get a handle on the different ways this technology could be implemented. Also, we want to really look at what are the best practices and what some of those practices that really need to be improved. And also, let's be clear, I mean, we aren't the first to look at these systems and evaluate them, but we see as kind of a gap in the marketplace where a lot of others may just look at the systems as what really holds me in the lane the best. And that's not really the whole story. There's a lot more to it, and I'll get into that with the next slide. So we looked at 5 different ratings criteria. Certainly, capability and performance is important. So we did take a look at that, and we did various tests, both on our track and on the roads to evaluate how good is it at holding your lane and how good is it in terms of stop-and-go traffic. But that's not the whole story. That's why we looked at ease of use. Is it clear? How to use this? Are the displays intuitive? Is it clear when safe to use? For many of you, you'll understand the term ODD, Operational Design Domain. This is really a measure of enforcement of that operational design domain. And what it's crucially and clear is that most of these systems, while they outline, don't use it in this area, don't use it on small curvy roads, they allow that use, and people are going to have intentional misuse of the system, which can put them at risk. So we're looking at enforcement of that. 4th area, keeping the driver engaged. This is paramount. I mean, I think we all can understand these are not self-driving cars. These are the human is still driving these vehicles. However, if the system is doing a very good job of steering and doing speed control, it's just all too easy for someone to disengage, and we see this as a big risk. And finally, how to deal with an unresponsive driver. 2 ways to look at this. One is the person is not doing what they're supposed to do. They're not touching the steering wheel. How do we penalize them? The other way to look at this is, well, what if the person cannot respond? What if the person had some kind of medical issue? Is this system going to keep them safe? So looking through the ratings, this tells this story, we think very well. There's different approaches. We did, as we said, we do see Cadillac Super Cruise as the best because it combines the safeguards with that capability the best. But you know, Tesla is very, very good at the capability, but doesn't do that good of a job of keeping that driver engaged. And going down the list, just one thing, you know, really to point out is that we didn't do this in a bubble. We reached out to manufacturers. We reached out to every one of them that we rated. And it was very interesting that, and I hate to kind of speak for Nissan, Infiniti, and Volvo, but I mean, they did indicate to us that they were almost curious at why we would rate these as automation systems, because they were like, well, these are really just kind of assistance systems. They're, you know, to help you steer the wheel. They're not really necessarily designed for that. But when we looked at their sales material, and we looked at their materials, marketing materials, I mean, the Nissan system is explained as an L2 system. The Volvo Pilot Assist system actually at the time was under their automated driving, autonomous driving tab on their website. And actually, fortunately, they did change that after we brought them to their attention. But it still really indicates as a semi-autonomous system, which really makes it seem like it has much more capability. So that's why we really put it in. And it also just, it shows kind of the span of these systems that really range from a system that is truly steering and taking care of those tasks to ones that try to assess, but again, aren't clear to the driver. So kind of coming to chase, I mean, some of the key insights that I just want to, for the takeaways here, when you look at the technology, eye tracking, it has a lot of potential. When we look at these systems, regardless of how frequent the reminders to put your hands on the wheel are, having your hand on the wheel does not make sure that someone is actually looking where they're going. And eye tracking, no, it's not perfect, but it's certainly a much better way. And the other interesting thing is that eye tracking does have potential even outside of these types of systems, and we haven't seen that. And it's the potential to make perhaps get the lane departure warnings a little less annoying, or have adjust forward collision warning in a way, or just to let someone know they're not paying attention, even if they're just driving the car manually. Execution, it varied widely. But we did notice that some of the systems that are supposed to assist you in turning the wheel, well, sometimes they actually fight you. So in terms of actually helping the driver, not so much. It could actually make a very easy task of steering the wheel actually more complicated. And expectation, really it's a lot about expectation. What do people think these systems are? And if that's not clear when the vehicle is designed for X and people are perhaps marketed it to Y, it's going to be very difficult to figure out what it's for, and there's going to be a lot of very dissatisfied customers when it's not doing what they think it's going to be doing. Moving on to our next topic, ADAS Nomenclature Working Group. So just to be very clear about what we're trying to do, and I'm sure everyone has heard me go on and on and on about how the big problem of we're calling all these systems different things and the confusion that causes. And I'm sure we all know of like 5 different terms for everything. What we're trying to do is we're trying to establish common generic terminology for advanced driver assist systems so that consumers understand what these systems do and what vehicles have and what's in each option package. And to be very clear, we're not trying to say you can't call it the marketing term. We're not saying it can't be called, you know, Honda Sense or, you know, whatever it is. I mean, there's certain marketing terms. We understand that, and there's packages, and we get that. What we're trying to say is we want generic terms to say, okay, what's in that package? What's in your safety package? Well, it includes X, Y, and Z, not lane changing assist plus, because nobody really knows what that is. So that's really what we're trying to do. And the benefits are clarity to consumers of what they're actually buying and potentially a faster adoption of this system if we could all speak the same language and saying, oh, my automatic emergency braking system did this, as opposed to my pre-safe collision plus did that, because that doesn't really help anyone. So I'm just going to show another little piece of data that we collected this year. And this was a nationwide survey that we did this year. And we asked people what features are extremely important to new car buyers. And maybe not surprisingly, reliability was very important, but you get very quickly into safety, crash protection, safety features. Lower down the list, tech features, brand. And I'm highlighting those for a reason, because the safety features were twice as important as what brand they're purchasing. Which means that if they get those safety features they want, if they could get the automatic emergency braking or the forward collision warning, these systems that have proven track record of actually preventing crashes, they'll change brands. They'll go to another car. And if the industry wants to sell cars to consumers, and we know the consumers are going out of their way trying to find these safety features, they're going to buy the cars because they understand what they're getting. If they could get the automatic emergency braking, which they know what it is, as opposed to the pre-collision safety plus, that may be a buying decision. A little background on the working group. This talks about kind of where we are. We've assembled a group that we're trying to figure out how to go about this, and this has not been easy, but we have agreed on some initial terms. We're trying to eat this elephant one bite at a time. We can't figure out all the names for every term, but there are some that we've agreed on. And I'm going to share those with you. So these ADAS terms, automatic emergency braking, forward collision warning, adaptive cruise control, blind spot warning, lane departure warning, lane keeping assist, and the short terms that you probably know of, AEB, FCW, et cetera. We have an agreement from the organizations on the right that we are or will be shortly using all those same terms. AAA advocates for highway and auto safety. Brian Reamer from the MIT ABT Consortium, us, IIHF, JD Power, My Car Does What, and anyone who's seen that site that does a great job of trying to explain what these systems do and trying to make it clear, the National Safety Council, the University of Iowa, National Advanced Driving Simulator, we have all come together and said, look, let's be honest, these may not be the best terms. These may not be the terms that I want. But these are the terms that are more commonly used. They explain what it does. And if we at least all use these exact same terms, we're going to have a chance that people understand what we're talking about. And what I would like is anyone, an organization, if you're in an automaker, if you could join us and use at least these same common terms, people are going to know what's on the cards. People are going to know the terms that you're talking about. If you want to participate, please email us, autosafety@consumer.org. And I will be presenting this again with the reliability press conference, and I would love to see your name added to this list. I would love to see some car companies added to this list. So I think it's It's one of these things that's in the best interest for consumers. It's the best interest for automakers. It's really the right thing to do. And the next thing I just want to talk about is what's next. Where are we going? And again, this is a little bit insight into what we're going to do. We're not making any changes in our ratings right now. But by all indications, pedestrian detection is really the next big thing in terms of really preventing fatalities. And just to draw your attention to the little chart, and I'm sure everyone has heard, you know, how highway fatalities, traffic fatalities are going up. And they, you know, it's really sad. I mean, cars are getting absolutely safer, but more people are dying. But when you look at this, and all I did was I looked at 2009 fatalities compared to 2016, and everyone's talked about how much they've gone up. But if you separate it by the pedestrian-related fatalities to ones that aren't pedestrian-related, there's been an 11% increase across the board of ones that are not pedestrian-related. The ones that were pedestrian-related nearly doubled. There was nearly 6,000 pedestrians killed in motor vehicle crashes in 2016. And that accounts for more than half of the increase that we're seeing. Now, that's bad, but the good news is there's a technology out there that can help. The IIHS has shared data that when they looked at Subaru's EyeSight system as it was installed, and unfortunately Subaru's EyeSight system you can find in the VIN, so you can actually find vehicles out there that have it and then don't. They were able to cut pedestrian crashes by up to 41% with that implementation. That would translate to many lives saved. So when you look at how much it is being offered, though, 69% of the models, this is Consumer Reports data, when we look at the models across the board, we track this and we provide this information to consumers, 69% of the models offer it, but only a third of them offer standard equipment. So that means that there are many vehicles out there that you have automatic emergency braking, you have forward collision warning, but then you have to pay extra in another package, perhaps even a luxury package, called something you may not even know, in order to get pedestrian detection. When you look at forward collision warning and low speed AEB, the lives that are going to be saved, many of them are going to be pedestrians. It's a city system, especially at low speed. At that speed, yeah, it's rear-end crashes. You know, maybe there's whiplash. But in terms of the lives, you do need these systems to be able to detect pedestrians. So I'm not announcing today that we're going to remove any credit for FCW or AEB unless you have pedestrian detection. I'm not announcing that today. But I am saying that we're looking very seriously at pedestrian detection availability and making it standard equipment in the future. And that is my story. So with that, we're going to open up the Q&A. And just a reminder on the slide, you can access our safety report at the URL you see, cr.org/media/room. There will be new reports on partial automation systems, which will go deeper into what we talked about today, and the consumer acceptance of ADAS systems, and I shared some of that data with you today as well. And that will be sent to all the attendees. And if you have any inquiries about our data intelligence program and safety reports, and if you'd like to participate in the nomenclature initiative, please email us at autosafety@consumer.org.
Thank you so much, Jake. Again, if you've got questions, and I see a few of them coming in, you can type them into the pods, and we'll go ahead and get started with the Q&A portion. So, Jake, the first question that we have was about the blind spot warning feature that we mentioned, and our poll. And so the question was, did we poll if folks, if they, for some reason, didn't like the blind spot warning feature, if they used their turning signals?
Yeah, great question. I mean, it's very interesting because if you, well, first of all, let me say that the vast majority were very satisfied with that, with the blind spot. I mean, it was really a landslide in terms of the poll there. And of the people who were not very satisfied, many of them were satisfied. So just a little insight in terms of how we asked the question. There are very few people that do not like the system. I don't think we have enough people that didn't like it to even make that judgment.
Right, and the key point there was that the numbers we were showing were the highly satisfied, but there were gradations. And so
that's right. Yeah. Yeah, there were very, very few people that didn't like the system.
Great. And so we had another question about pedestrian detection and if the data included cyclists, scooters, or if those were in another classification. And we mentioned a few data sets. So.
Yeah, well, I mean, the data that I was really highlighting was looking at the IHS study that was looking at a specific system of the eyesight, which I do believe has the ability to pick up cyclists and others in that. So I do believe it has the ability of cyclists, adults, and even children. But, you know, it does bring up a point that not all pedestrian detection systems are the same. There's many different scenarios of picking them up, and that definitely does warrant further inquiry of, you know, what truly is an effective pedestrian detection system. I mean, personally, I think anything is better than nothing, but we certainly want to strive for people to detect more.
And I think we almost have a follow-up question about someone asking if pedestrian deaths could be partly attributed to the pedestrian distraction as much as the in-vehicle distraction.
I believe it is. I was in Manhattan yesterday. I had a conference call where I was walking down the street on my phone, and I kind of realized, wow, this is probably just as dangerous as driving with. I mean, it's both. You know, all we know is the data shows that the pedestrians are getting hurt. Whether or not it's a distracted pedestrian who is looking at their phone while they walk into the middle of the street, or a driver being distracted by their phone or something else, honestly, it doesn't matter because of the system that can help in both the situations.
Got it. And another question has come in asking if customers prefer lane keep assist to have strong torque with the steering wheel or minimal torque.
Yeah, well, I mean, we'll have more information. I mean, I think this is really gets into our EDAS report, and we looked really deeply into this. I will share that really the jury is out whether or not any torque is the right thing to do in this. So, you know, certainly the warnings can be helpful as long as they're not nuisance warnings. But when we look at sometimes when these systems are a little fighting with the driver, that can be problematic. And in terms of the strong torque, you know, and again, it's difficult because many automakers give varied. They're able to give strong torque or different adjustments. But, I mean, one of the potentially worst scenarios is that scenario when you're driving down the road and you try to give a policeman on the side of the road, a cyclist, a pedestrian some room, and you find your car giving strong torque fighting you back into that person. So there's definitely some issues here.
We have a question asking, you know, how we selected for the L2 systems we did, how we made that selection, and there's a question about other systems from folks like Mercedes, Lexus, and Audi. Mercedes had a system where we at Consumer Reports actually were critical of the marketing showing hands off of the wheel, and because of us raising the issue, they ended up changing that marketing. I don't know.
Yeah, well, I mean, specifically the Mercedes-Benz Drive Pilot system when it was launched, and we actually have that system on a Mercedes-Benz E-Class that we still have at the track, 2017 model year. And that was advertised as your self-driving Mercedes-Benz has arrived. I mean, that's how it was marketed initially. And we raised issues, and it did change, and actually they've changed the name of Drive Pilot. That was not included, we didn't want to include the Drive Pilot system because that is kind of a discontinued system. We currently don't have any of the Mercedes-Benz with a newer system, but it's certainly not being marketed as capable. But the questioner is right. I mean, there are other systems out there that are coming online. They're potentially not marketed to such an extent that they are semi-autonomous, L2, et cetera. But some are coming on board. I mean, we're definitely going to be taking a look at some other systems. I mean, I'm looking forward to trying out, for instance, BMW's new system, which I know they've announced they will have some level of eye tracking on that as well. So we'll definitely be looking at other systems down the line. I mean, I'm not going to commit whether or not it's as simple as adding them to the list, or do we want to start kind of looking at different aspects of these? So more to come for sure.
And different technologies, if there would be different technologies that were added. I mean, I think that's a big interest of ours too.
Yeah, absolutely right.
So more questions on pedestrian detection. So is pedestrian detection referring to warning-only systems or also auto-braking? And someone's asking, is pedestrian detection also the agreed-upon nomenclature term, or is that one that you want to too?
Well, if you have a better term for it, please contact us at autosafety@consumer.org. No, it's not an agreed-on term. Very, very sharp question. That's really what we've been calling up till now. And it's far from perfect because it's not just talking about pedestrians. But referring to warning system, auto braking. Oh, is it? I'm sorry. So is it warning or also auto braking? And the way I'm looking at this right now is that is forward collision warning if it doesn't have pedestrian detection? Is AAB if it doesn't have that? I see it in some ways of kind of raising the bar of what actually these systems are. I mean, if an automaker calls something city safety, it really needs to react to a pedestrian because there's pedestrians in cities, right? So, yeah, so that's kind of how I look at it, but definitely consider other views.
So back to a question about our L2 rankings. Did we differentiate between lane keeping assistance and lane centering technologies for the various measures?
So this is good. I mean, this is the shades of gray between lane centering and assist is getting very blurry. And actually, on some of the systems, when you change the sensitivity of the systems, they go from one to the other. And they're not clear to what they are for the driver. So in terms of our ratings, we're really looking at the systems that are really marketing themselves to the driver as a system that is L2 or semi-autonomous, et cetera. If we looked at a system that really is just designed as an LKA system, lane keeping assist systems, it wouldn't rate very high, but keep in mind, we're looking at these systems as how well do they drive, how well do they automate driving, not as safety systems. And for an true LKA, which is just a momentary, if I go over the line, then I'm only going to react, that is a safety system that kind of needs maybe a different
well, we have a question
measure.
about how CR specifically defines LKA.
Right. Okay. So what we have done in the past, and we've explained in our safety report in the past, is we've differentiated from lane centering and lane keeping. And the way we've kind of split this is that lane keeping is just a momentary intervention when I need it. Lane centering is continuous. And that's also how we kind of differentiated a safety system from one that is convenience feature. Now, that was what we wrote last year in our safety report, and the market keeps on changing. And what we see now is more automakers that have a system that has a sensitivity control that could span from a momentary intervention to something that's continuous. So at this point, and to be clear about our nomenclature that we're proposing and that we're signing on, that we're seeing more of the lane centering as a subset of lane keeping. Lane keeping at its root is just the system turns the wheel for me. It may do it a lot, it may do it a little bit, it may do it momentary, it may do it continuous. So we're kind of taking it down just one level.
And so more questions on lane keeping assist. Are direct steering inputs generally acceptable to us, or are yaw-inducing brake interventions preferred? Do we have a view on that?
It depends on the situation. It depends on what you're trying to accomplish. I mean, if you're trying to automate steering, a yaw-inducing brake intervention is a terrible way to do it. If you're trying to get the attention of a driver, that might be the way to do it. But any of the brake systems trying to straighten you, I mean, it has to be just limited to something that's going to occur as a momentary intervention. But it definitely is a good question to really look into if we are going to do a momentary intervention, how to do that.
More questions. We have a question about, will we define our test criteria scenarios that we use for the new ADAS rating? I guess the question is, so we have the ratings criteria that we just presented for the L2, and those were the five different, different aspects and criteria. That is what we call our L2, rankings. And then for the ADAS nomenclature, that's less ratings than that is an initiative. So I guess I would just split those two.
So will you define test criteria scenarios to use for the ADAS ratings? I mean, I guess really the question is there more detail about exactly how we performed our test? And the answer is yes. So, and internally we're calling them L2. We're trying to call them partial automation systems because I think we may all disagree on what truly is L2. But to that point, we are compiling a report, and that will be sent to all the attendees of this webinar. Look forward to that, and it should answer many questions. It goes into far greater detail than what we published before.
We also have a couple of questions for folks on if we have feedback on any other vehicles out there. And right now, we don't, but, we are continuously, as Jake said, going to be looking at different systems and, evaluating them, maybe not adding them to these specific ratings that we have, keeping in mind that those may be evolving. So
we will be purchasing new vehicles,
yes,
new technologies, and absolutely evaluating them. And again, doing the same thing, trying to find the best practices and maybe things to be avoided.
We have a question about blind spot lane change alert systems differing substantially in detection ranges, where some systems can react to fast approaching vehicles. Are we looking at those differences given the detection range?
So I mean, so clearly not all systems are created equal. Some are better than others. But what our experience is with our testing here and what consumers are telling us is that these systems work as a whole very good. We're not seeing a lot of it missed something, and they're not 100%, but there's definitely a lot of satisfaction. In terms of which ones are better than others, one thing I do want to highlight is that the systems that actually provide a warning and rather than just let you know by a light. And to be clear what I mean by is a multimodal warning. So there's a difference between there's a light or something in my blind spot, or I'm turning my turn signal on now, and now I have an audible alert, or I've got a vibration in my seat. The ones that kind of change state when they see you're actually trying to change lanes, we saw a notable increase in satisfaction as well as the ability to prevent a crash. So those are the more effective systems, and I would say if you're looking at trying to implement these ones or which ones are better, that's the variable. We want to see something that when I actually go to change that lane, it umps the ante. It really lets me know, hey, stop, don't do that.
So we have a question about our nomenclature working group. Like, can we talk about the process a little bit? How often we meet, are there voting processes, how that's set up?
So right now, I mean, we're at this point where we see a group of terms. What we're looking at doing right now is we're trying to get a critical mass around these terms. Many of the groups, many groups have already signed on. We're hoping that when you see the same term at IHS, as Consumer Reports, that what my car does what, the NFC, et cetera, that we start to see automakers use these too. That's really, because ultimately, if the automakers are not calling these things the terms that people understand, we're not accomplishing anything by this group. I mean, it certainly helps if the organizations call that. That does help. But ultimately, when you get in that car, you have to know what system you have or what option package to buy to get it, or I'm going to buy this car because it has it. So that's really kind of the litmus test for this. I think once we get some feedback on there and if there's some success on that, some of the other terms are hard. I mean, we're stumbling over what to call L2 and an automation, partial automation right now. You know, even things like rear cross traffic warning. There's a lot of systems out there, and we definitely need to have input from all the stakeholders and the automakers to really go somewhere with that. But right now, we're kind of looking at kind of the easy terms. I mean, the terms that really there is pretty widespread agreement on. And I just hope we could get somewhere with some of the automakers.
And as we said, if you want to join or be part of it and learn about the activities, you can email us at autosafety@consumer.org.
Yeah.
And as you know, Jake, you pointed out on the slide, we had some milestones that we wanted to meet, you know, by the spring, kind of having enough folks signed on and getting consensus so we can move on to additional terminology. So that's really kind of the plan that we have. We have a question about automatic emergency braking and asking us if we think the term implies that it will brake in any emergency, including those involving pedestrians, cyclists, or other objects.
So this is the well, as I said before, these terms are not perfect. But we can't let the perfect stop us from moving. There's always going to be the ability to misinterpret this. You know what? I could argue that cruise control is a terrible name for what it does. Does it control your cruising? Is it only available when you're cruising? Does it, I don't know, you know, does it control steering too? Can I just turn it on and get in the back seat? I don't know. Cruise control, what does that mean? It should be called speed control, constant speed control. It should be CSC. But the fact that everyone calls it cruise control, that's the important part. The fact that everyone calls ABS is the important part. So, I don't disagree that it could be misinterpreted if you look at those words. But if we could get a critical mass of everyone calling this what it is, that's the only way we're going to move anywhere on this.
And ensure that consumers are not confused.
Right. Right now, it's called anything.
Well, so consumers make assumptions about what it does and does not do because not everything is called the same thing, and it may include a feature.
Right. In fact, a lot of automakers use the word prevention. So crash prevention. These systems don't necessarily prevent crashes. They might mitigate it, might help, might alert you, but there's so many words that really can be misleading here. Yeah.
Or prevent crashes into people.
Sure.
Which is what the question about.
Right.
Will it detect pedestrians?
Mm-hmm.
Someone asked a question about, will our ratings be comparable with those from IHS, seeing as how we're both two kind of respected bodies in the field working on this issue. And, we do work with IHS and respect them a great deal. Jake, I don't know if you want to say anything more about how we're trying to collaborate on this work or just make sure that we have not inconsistent messages from one another.
Yeah, I mean, we're definitely, we do communicate with IHS. I think they're see these things very much the same way that we see them. We have a lot of, we're both very interested in pushing some of the safety technology. But I mean, I haven't seen the ratings of the system, but there's different ways of looking at the systems. It all depends on kind of what aspect you're looking at. So, but I don't anticipate any conflict.
So we have a few kind of logistical questions from folks about the webinar and making the presentation available. So just to reinforce that we'll probably send the follow-up certainly no later than Tuesday of next week, Tuesday or Wednesday of next week, because we need to just, we've done a recording of it, and we just need to make sure that it works, and have some of our tech folks just make sure it's able to send out. So we're looking at middle of next week for that, along with a PDF of the presentation, which we will also make available. Another question asking us if we've considered a request for comments for the U.S. NCAP program with regards to technologies to be included, along with common nomenclature and consumer education. So in other words, asking for NCAP maybe to be modified. So us as a kind of consumer organization approaching the government and saying, hey, maybe you want to modify NCAP to ensure that all of this is included. And that's a great suggestion that we're certainly going to talk about with our DC policy folks. So thank you for that.
Yeah, thank you.
We'll take that as a follow-up item.
Agreed.
All right, making its way through our questions here. So someone asked if as an automaker, the option for the user to disable the blind spot warning exists, would they still get the credit in terms of our overall score?
Currently, we are still giving credit for the systems even if they allow it to be disabled. Not saying that we will always hold that to be true, but currently we are. We do recognize there could be some situations, but we'll definitely be monitoring that. But I mean, all I could share is our current practice.
There's a question about whether or not the recent rankings affect our overall score and recommendation status. And right now, they are not factored into the overall score. They do not affect the recommended status. We did it specifically as a way of saying, here's the technology that's out there, here are the differences we're seeing, and presenting that.
And there's one other aspect of it. Each one of these systems is an option. And so it's not a system that will necessarily be on every model. And it's not a system that you will necessarily use, even if it is on the vehicle. So, so no, in terms of that, we're not incorporating into it.
And that's why specifically it was an evaluation of the systems themselves, because again, we wanted to look comparatively at the technology that was on the market, and in some ways be able to influence what comes out in the future, to be able to say, we think a system like this works better than a system like that, and to be able to have conversations like that.
That's exactly right. So
that was a big driver for what it is that we were doing. We have a question about our unresponsive driver criteria. So, the question is, why is that a criteria? How does that really factor in? Like, why did we choose the unresponsive, how it works with an unresponsive driver? What was our thinking on that?
Sure. So the thinking there is, when you look at most of these systems, if a driver cannot respond to the alerts to look at the road or touch the steering wheel, these systems will go through a process. I call it the Nissan system, Nissan Infinity system, will actually kind of pump the brakes trying to alert the driver. I mean, say the person passed out, fell asleep. Most of these systems will slow down the vehicle and keep it in its lane, not try to prevent a road departure. Often turn on the hazard lights. They may call call 911. I mean, these are how it goes. We were dismayed when we saw the Volvo system on the case that, say, you couldn't respond to a warning to touch the steering wheel. It just shut off. It turned off the steering assist, which could allow the vehicle just to drift off the road. So, so we think, if you're going to have the capability to keep someone safe, say they fell asleep, say they passed out, say they had a heart attack, why not use it? And even to double down on that, why not use it even if you're not using your partially automated system? I don't understand why these systems who can detect someone let go of the steering wheel and is drifting out of their lane or isn't looking at the road, why don't they use the features of these systems to keep them safe? I think that's a huge opportunity here.
So we also had a question about a function called rear cross traffic alerts, which prevents accidents when backing out of a parking spot and brakes automatically when a car is crossing the path. Is this a function considered in the ADAS selection?
Yes, it is. It is in our report that is coming out on the ADAS systems. That is a highly desirable system. Absolutely. People like it. People believe it helps them preventing crashes. I will say that the crashes that it prevents, obviously they're parking type things, but still there could be a pedestrian involved. They're very good. We believe that all cars should have that system. So we absolutely are highly supportive of that system.
Well, it looks like we are pretty much at time, and we've gone through pretty much all the questions that we've had, which worked out very well. So we thank you so much for your time. Again, as a reminder, mid-next week, you'll hear from us again with the webinar, the presentation itself, and we'll also give you a heads up when we post that reliability new overall score information. And again, any follow-up questions, please email autosafety@consumer.org. And we thank you so much for your time.